Dataframe columns. Since data frames are in the shape of tables with rows and columns, we will often use the intersection of the two to get specific cell values. But there are times when we may want to select a column of data, known as a series, or multiple columns to form a new data frame. In this section, we will look at various ways to go about this. First, as always, let's import our Pandas data frame as PD. And we are going to read in a CSV player stats total. And then to make things easier, we are going to just take a sample 20 rows of the data frame and save them into a df-slim. Now, one of the first things I do whenever I read in a CSV into a data frame is list all of the column names. Not only does this give me more background information on what to expect, but I can see if certain column names need to be renamed or even deleted. To see a list of all the column names, we use the list command. So here we write list, and within it we pass the data frame name, which in this case would be df-slim. And here we see we have all of our column names, including player name, player ID, season ID, and a bunch of data stat columns. It will return a list of all data frame columns for closer inspections. We may find ourselves converting this list of column names to an actual list, which we can modify for renaming columns or using a for loop later. Now let's say we want to select just one column. There are two primary ways to select a single column of data. The first is pretty straightforward, and that is using dot notation. You call the column name you want and chain it to the data frame name like so. So here it would be df-slim and then dot notation, and in our case, let's call the player name column. And run this. And you'll see here we have our 20 names of different players. DJ Augustine, Dwayne Wade, Corver, Irving, Wiggins. Wow, what an interesting Jordan Farmar, Hayward. This would be a good pickup game. This is not my preferred method since it only works for column names without any spaces. So for example, if we had df-slim and let's say our column name was player, or let's do a capital player name, we would get an error. That brings us to the alternate and preferred way to go about selecting a single column, and that is passing the column name within square brackets of the data frame, like so. So within it, we would pass the column name. And in our case, let's go up and get the column for points. So if we ran this, we should get just the points column for each of our 20 players. And there we have totals, so it's not an average. And again, if we return just a single column, it is going to be a data frame series. And to prove I'm not fibbing when I say that a single column is a series, let's call the type on our new object. So we'll take type, and we'll go the df-slim points column, and we should expect to see a series. Now we can also select multiple columns in a data frame by passing in two or more columns. The moment we have multiple columns means we are no longer dealing with a series, but dealing with an entire new data frame. So for instance, if we wanted the player's name and the points, we would write df, same thing, but this time we're going to pass a list of the column names. So here we have another bracket. Let's get the player name as one, comma, points as the other. And I forgot that it's df-slim. And so if we run this, we should see a combination of these two. And you'll see just the slight difference of it's no longer a series, but now a data frame, more in line to what we're used to seeing. The tricky part here is that we need double bracket frames. Now, we could also change the order of our columns and how they are returned so the player name comes second. If we wanted to do that differently, we just pass in double brackets. We pass in points first, and then player name, and it is swapped. This can get pretty cluttered when calling multiple column names. As a result, you will see Pandas enthusiasts provide a Python list to tell Pandas which columns we want. To do this, we can create a list with the columns we want and a comma to separate each item in the list. So for example, let's say we had a list of columns variable that was a list, and we wanted player name, we wanted free throws made, and we wanted free throws attempted. So now if we run this and we have our list of columns, we can then pass in to the square brackets list of columns. So instead of passing the long text and dealing with all the double brackets, we can pass the list stored in a variable instead, and it will give us the same result. So if we run this, and just like that, for our 20 players, we have free throws made and free throws attempted throughout the season. So now if we wanted to change the columns, we could just change the Python lists. It is a much nicer looking syntax, which is why you will see more people approaching it this way. The double brackets can get tricky and confusing. There is another less popular way to go about selecting columns from a data frame. This is the ILock method that stands for integer location, and it is a position-based selection. This means it uses a row selection and column selection by passing in numbers. Each column is a number starting with 0 and ranging to the length of the data frame shape. So again, if we were to list our data frame, player name would be column 0, player ID would be column 1, season ID column 2, and so on and so forth. So if we wanted to test using the ILock method, we would pass a list of rows, which in this case, if we want all 20 of them, we just put the colon, comma, and if we passed in 0, this would give us the first row, which would be the player name. So if we run this, we'd expect to see the player name and returned as a series. And similarly, we could do this again, called the iLock, take all 20 rows, and let's say we wanted the second column, which was the player ID. We pass a 1, and just to give you one more example, the iLock all 20, we could take the last column name with a negative. Now, the same as above, we can pass in multiple columns using the integer location. So if we wanted the df slim iLock all 20 rows, and let's say we wanted the first 3 columns, we would pass 0 to 3. Now it's not going to include the 3, it will be 0, 1, 2 and not include 3. So there we have it, the player name, player ID, and season ID. And in a similar way, we could get kind of some random columns, let's say 1, 4, and 6. And this will give us the second, 5th, and 7th columns. So again, if we choose just one column, it's going to return a series. And the same rules for ranges apply to this as well, which means the column selected will go from the first number to 1 minus the second number. Next, we'll look more into adding and deleting columns, followed by renaming columns, and eventually get over to rows.